The ocean. Silent. Vast. Endless. Centuries ago, the Atlantic was more than just water. It was mystery. It was danger. It was the edge of the known world. But there was one small nation, one people, who dared to face it. Portugal. A kingdom barely the size of a modern state. Yet its sailors, its captains, its dreamers, would become the first to stretch the boundaries of the world. And in their wake, they would leave footprints sometimes faint, sometimes forgotten, on the shores of a distant land that would one day be called the United States of America. The age of discovery begins. Let us journey back to the 1400s. Europe was restless. The medieval world was fading. And a hunger for wealth, for trade, for power, was rising. Spices from the east, gold from Africa, new routes across the seas. This was the dream of kings and merchants alike. And while mighty kingdoms like France and England looked inward, Portugal looked outward. Guided by Prince Henry the Navigator, the Portuguese began what we call today the Age of Discovery. They invented new ships, the caravels, small, fast, and able to cut through fierce winds. They created maps more accurate than any before. They studied the stars, the tides, the currents. While others feared the ocean, the Portuguese made it their highway. Before Columbus, the Portuguese. We often hear of Christopher Columbus. 1492, the discovery of America. But what is often forgotten is that Columbus himself was shaped by Portugal. He lived in Lisbon. He married a Portuguese noblewoman. He studied Portuguese charts and learned from Portuguese captains. Without Portugal, Columbus would have been just another dreamer. Instead, he became the man who sailed west under Spain's flag, carrying Portuguese knowledge across the sea. And when Spain and Portugal clashed over new lands, they drew the world into two halves. With the Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494, Spain would claim much of the Americas. But Portugal would rule Brazil, and everything beyond the line to the east. Yet, Portugal's ambition could not be confined to lines on paper. Portuguese voyages to the north. Long before the English set foot in Jamestown. Long before the French explored Canada. There are whispers that Portuguese sailors had already reached the shores of North America. Historians speak of João Fernandes Lavrador, a nobleman and explorer who sailed west in the late 1400s. The land he reached was cold, rocky, and strange. He called it Terra do Lavrador, the land of Labrador. And today, we still call it by that name, Labrador, in Canada. Then came the Corte-Real brothers Gaspar and Miguel. Sailing for Portugal, they explored the coasts of Newfoundland and beyond. They captured native people, brought them back to Europe, and spoke of lands rich with forests, fish, and promise. Were they among the first Europeans to set eyes on the edges of what is now the United States? Some say yes. The mystery deepens when we look at maps. Like the Cantino Planisphere of 1502. It shows coastlines of the New World, years before Spain officially mapped them. Lines, bays, rivers, drawn with uncanny accuracy. Where did this knowledge come from? Could Portuguese fishermen have been secretly visiting these shores, quietly keeping their discoveries hidden to protect their treasure, the cod-rich waters of the North Atlantic? The answer may never be fully known. But the clues are undeniable. The cod, the ocean, and the hidden visits. For centuries, the waters off Newfoundland were the greatest fishery in the world. Cod so abundant that sailors wrote you could scoop them from the sea with baskets. And cod was gold. It fed Europe's armies, its cities, its growing populations. It lasted through long winters and sea voyages. Fishermen from Portugal almost certainly crossed the Atlantic, quietly, secretly, long before official records. They sailed to the Grand Banks, filled their holds with fish, and returned home. They left no grand colonies, no cities, no fortresses. But they left whispers that still echo in history. Portuguese among the Spanish. As the 1500s unfolded, Spain took center stage in the Americas. Florida, Mexico, Peru, the Caribbean, the Spanish crown spread its power wide. But in the shadows of their expeditions, you will often find Portuguese names. Portuguese sailors, navigators, cartographers, serving under Spanish flags, guiding ships, mapping unknown coasts. In Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico, even in California centuries later, Portuguese hands were steering the wheel. The story of North America is often told as Spanish, French, English. But hidden in the logs of ships, in the signatures on maps, are the marks of Portugal. Why no great colonies in the USA? And yet, a question remains. Why did Portugal, with all its skill, all its daring, all its knowledge, not claim vast colonies in what is now the United States? The answer lies in geography, and in empire. For Portugal, Brazil was the prize. Lush forests, fertile soil, sugar plantations. And later, gold and diamonds. Brazil was closer to Africa, closer to home, easier to defend. It was vast enough to absorb all of Portugal's ambitions. North America, with its colder lands, harsher climates, and rival powers, was left to others. Portugal became the master of Brazil, Africa, and Asia. But the northern continent slipped quietly from its grasp. Immigration and the Portuguese in America. But the story does not end there. Centuries later, Portuguese would come again. Not as conquerors, not as explorers, but as immigrants. In the 1800s, waves of Portuguese families crossed the ocean to New England. They settled in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and beyond. They worked in whaling, in fishing, in farming. Later, others arrived in California drawn by the gold rush, and by fertile farmland. Still more sailed to Hawaii, working the sugar plantations, leaving behind traditions of music, food, and faith. Though Portugal never planted its flag in North America, its people planted roots. And today, Portuguese American communities thrive, carrying echoes of the seafaring past. Legacy and reflection. So, what is the legacy of Portugal in the land that would become the United States? It is not grand empires, not great battles, not mighty cities. It is the quiet presence of explorers. The hidden maps. The secret voyages. The fishermen who crossed the Atlantic before others dared. It is the stories of sailors who served under many flags. And of immigrants who built lives on distant shores. Portugal's mark on America is not carved in stone. It is whispered in the waves. In the names of places like Labrador. In the maps that tell more than they should. And in the communities that still sing songs of the sea. Closing, dramatic reflection. The story of the Portuguese in America is the story of shadows and whispers. A people who tamed the ocean. Who showed the world the path. But who chose their treasure elsewhere. Yet without them, the great age of discovery would never have unfolded the way it did. And so, though the world remembers Columbus, Spain, England, France, we must not forget the quiet navigators of Portugal. The pathfinders, the map makers, the dreamers of horizons. Because history is not only about the conquerors who built empires. It is also about those who opened the way. And whose footprints, though faint, still remain on the shores of America.